Namaste, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for our third talk that we're hosting to celebrate the International Day of Yoga. So before we start our session today, I would like to invite Bhima Shankarji, who is part of the Indica Yoga team and has undergone the Gurukulam system of education for 13 years, first at Prabodhini Gurukulam at Sringeri and then at Veda Vijnana Gurukulam at Bangalore. He also did his master's in yoga from S. Vyasa and another master's in Advaita Vedanta from the Karnataka Sanskrit University. So we would just like to invite Bhima Shankarji to start our session on an auspicious note with an opening prayer. Would you like to join? Yes.
Thank you, Satyaji, and thank you, Indica Yoga platform. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. Om Bhadram Karnebhi Shrunuyama Devaha Bhadram Pashyemakshabhidyajatraha स्थिरैरङ्गैस्तुष्टुवागुंसस्तनूभिः व्यशेम देवहितं यदायुः स्वस्ति न इन्द्रो वृद्धश्रवाः स्वस्ति नः पूषा विश्ववेदाः स्वस्ति नस्तार्क्ष्यो अरिष्टनेमिः स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्दधातु Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat.
Thank you so much, Bhima Shankarji. That was such a beautiful, auspicious beginning to today's session. And today's session, I'm very happy to say, is going to be hosted by the director of Indica Yoga, Dr. Vinayachandra Banavathy, who is also the director of the Center for Indian Knowledge Systems at the Chanakya University in Bangalore. And today, Dr. Banavathy will talk to us and highlight the works of Sri Aurobindo. And Sri Aurobindo had begun one of his greatest works, The Synthesis of Yoga, with a chapter titled Life is Yoga, where he explores in a systematic manner the work and movements of nature towards a higher synthesis and evolution, a task of high priority for her. Through this exploration, he brings out in a puissant manner that all life essentially is an unfolding of yoga at various levels. This talk seeks to present the vision of Sri Aurobindo as part of our theme, Life in Yoga. So can I please invite Dr. Banavathy to join us? Namaste, Dr. Banavathy.
Namaste.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And as the director of Indica Yoga, I think it's the perfect sort of, end to the three talks we've had to celebrate the International Day of Yoga and Yoga for Humanity. So I'll leave the session with you now, and I'll see you towards the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia, and thank you, Bhima Shankar, and all my colleagues at Indica Yoga, Datta Prasad, Koti ji, Srinivas ji, and all the others who have been a constant source of support in taking some wonderful experiences to people in the field of yoga. In line with our commitment to bring in authentic, immersive, and transformative programs, this year we are presenting you with a 3-talk series titled Life in Yoga as a part of the 8th edition of International Day of Yoga celebrations. What we thought was, yoga is not just something that we do on the mat for an hour or so, but something that has to extend to the life mat. And if that has to extend to the life mat, we should have some solid examples in front of us so that we too are inspired. We too have that courage to walk that path and know and be assured that there are people who have already walked this path and it is possible. Therefore, keeping this theme, Life in Yoga, we looked into 3 great masters of our recent times. Not that the field of yoga is limited to these 3 or begins or ends with these 3, but these were the 3 recent teachers accessible to us in quite a recent time. That was Swami Vivekananda, Ramana Maharshi, And today we'll be looking into Sri Aurobindo. There have been many more masters, quite from the Vedic times to modern times. There have been men, there have been women, there have been people from different origins, from different social strata. All of them have already shown us how to lead a life in yoga, so that it's not just doing yoga, but being in yoga. So let's now look into specifically the life and work of Sri Aurobindo to understand his philosophy of integral yoga. In this short session, we won't have the freedom to get into the details of his theories and philosophies, but we'll just look into a small part. But that we'll see in the backdrop of his own life, because it's his life that sets the right note for his yoga to evolve. So with this, I'll straight away dive into the topic of the day, that is, all life is yoga. What does it actually mean? Why does he bring in this concept? Where does he bring in? How do we understand this statement? This is such a profound statement. All life is yoga. There are only two important words there. Otherwise, the rest are connective words. Life and yoga. How can they be synonymous if a statement is all life is yoga and life is being equated to yoga and yoga to life, which is not clearly the way we understand in modern times or in current times. So, this being the case, how do we make sense of this statement? Even though at an intellectual level, at a cognitive level, we might make some sense, but does it have a practical implication? How do I practically understand it? Is what we'll explore a little bit today. Just to give you a brief glimpse about his life, people like Swami Vivekananda or Sri Aurobindo cannot be described in a short period. The work that they have done lasts for thousands and thousands of years. Therefore, doing any sort of justice is not possible. Yet, just for our context, I'll present Sri Aurobindo's life in a very brief manner. Broadly, we can understand his life in three different phases. And the first one is some sort of a prelude to the next three important phases of his life. So first one is more of his beginnings. And interestingly, the beginnings did not happen in India, did not happen anything to do with India, and was far away from any spiritual or yogic thought. He was born in the year 1872, and within a matter of few years, he had to leave India along with his brothers to England, where his main education took place for the next 14 years. Wherever he went to his schooling or his college, he stood first among his friends. He also got into King's College in Cambridge through high scholarship, high classical scholarship, which was usually available for the top meritorious students. So he availed that scholarship, he went there, and later he also appeared for Indian Civil Services, which also he passed through in a quite distinctive manner, but he failed to appear for horse riding examination, and upon which after some time he got disqualified. So this was in a way his beginning. In fact, in the year 1872 he was born, and after 7 years he went to England and stayed there for 14 years, and it was only in the year 1893 he comes back to India. And interestingly, this year coincides with the year in which Swami Vivekananda travels abroad. Though both of them never met in their life physically, but there were instances where there has been very powerful exchange between them. So 1893 he comes, but he comes home to a tragedy. His father, who was expecting him in an earlier ship, is made to believe, or he believes that son died because there was a ship mishap there. So he thinks that his son died, and he loses his life. And for some reason, I mean, for greater good, Sri Aurobindo is alive. He was on other ship. He reaches India, but by that time his father was also not there. So he couldn't get to meet his father at all. So this was his first encounter with India after coming back. Otherwise, he was quite a young kid when he left India. So all that he had was Occidental education. He was good in English, of course. He was also good in few other European languages, but had no connection either to his mother tongue Bengali or Sanskrit or any of the Indian languages. And if you don't have a language, language is always a carrier of culture, right? To get to the elements of the culture is also so difficult. So even that was not available to him. He had no access to Indian thought or Indian culture. And the people who took care of him were specifically instructed to keep him away from the Indic thought. So this being the case, I mean, you just wonder what destiny holds, right? When someone has been brought up in such a manner, and at the age of 21, he comes back home, and then there is a sea change that awaits, not just for himself, but for the world that follows, right? So he comes here, he comes like while he was in England itself, he meets the Gaikwad of Baroda, the king of Baroda, and gets a job in his service. So he comes home, and nearly for about from 1893 up to 1906 or so, 13 years, he spends time in Baroda. This can be considered as a preparatory phase. Preparatory, a strong preparatory phase for the next two phases that follow, right? And this is where initially he was working in the revenue department, but given his background and his intellectual pursuits and his interests, he shifts over to teaching. And he was one of the best teachers of those times. He was teaching English literature and many other things. And in this time, he also picks up a lot of Sanskrit, Bengali, and many other things that he had no access hitherto. So this time, he is in the service in Baroda. He's also a little bit familiar with the political movements that are happening. It was at that time that the Indian political freedom movement was really gaining momentum. So there was an active progress towards that end, and yet he was a little aloof from it. So he was not directly involved, but was getting himself familiarized with what was happening around. And in 1902, he leaves Baroda and then moves to Bengal, where a new educational institution was established, the Bengal National College. And it was specifically established to nurture nationalists who can really fight for country's freedom. It's at this period Sri Aurobindo's the practice of yoga starts to get deepening. In the year 1904, he has some sort of formal initiation. It continues, and later in 1907, it goes to the next level. But this period is also considered his political life from 1902 to 1910, a very active political life. Of that, the first 4 5 periods, 4 5 years is some sort of political indulgence in the back foot, where he was more into inspiring other people or getting the intellectual work done or giving that kind of narrative for the work to happen. So that was the kind of work. He also had started a paper called Bande Matra, which the British felt at that time was one of the most terrorizing thing that was making them sleepless, right? So that was the Bande Mataram paper that he had started, and he was the editor of that magazine, and it had actually reached every corner of India and brought in a huge change in the mind of people. My Indian people at that point were not ready to continue to be subservient to the British. And in this context, Sri Aurobindo's contribution is immense, right? So, and it so happens by the turn of destiny, or just as a matter of fact, or something that was divinely planned. In the year 1907, he gets accused in a sedition case, followed by another case called as Alipur bomb case, and he's sent to jail for 1 year for an act that he was not part of. So in that 1 year, many things change. Initially, there is a lot of pain that Sri Aurobindo carries. he is so burdened with the thought that, see, now I had dedicated myself to Mother India, and I know I could do bring in some huge change. I had already seen the results of the seeds that I had laid. And now, why am I being kept captive? When I'm there to contribute, when I have the capacity to contribute, when there's a requirement for this work to be done, why am I here like this, in this helpless manner? Every morning, every moment, every night, this was his question. Why am I here like this? What wrong did I do? What disservice did I do? What makes me be changed here? Why can't I step out and do? So this was an intense pain that he carried, right? While this intense pain was there's something miraculous happens. He has a sort of a, after a few days of penury, after a few days of this kind of painful existence, there's some sort of silence that he enters to. And after that silence, all of a sudden there seems to be a revelation. He says, I could see Vasudeva everywhere. Vasudeva Krishna. He was in the tree. He was in that jailer. He was in the other inmates of that prison. Everyone, everywhere seemed to be Vasudeva and none but Vasudeva. So this was an intense spiritual realization that happens to him in his most painful state, following his most painful state. Then this was not, it initially happens as a one-time experience, but over a period of time, it just gets settled down. So for him, at that moment, everything was Vasudeva, and that pain turned into a very pleasant experience. Whatever pain he was carrying in the heart, that he's been bound and chained, did not it did not occur to him that he continued to be bound again. He felt that he's being held by Vasudeva, and there is another purpose that Vasudeva intends to give to me. In fact, it is in this point he says that he has an exchange with Swami Vivekananda. Of course, Swami Vivekananda was not there physically at that time. He had left his body. So it was through a mystical connection that Sri Aurobindo says, it's almost like Vivekananda giving him an inspiration to say that the work has to be done at a next level or at a different level. And the political work which they all had started is definitely going to yield results. So this becomes very clear to Sri Aurobindo at this point of time. The political work, the political freedom, emancipation of India is bound to happen. And the reason was also clear, the logic was also clear. He said, if the world needs spirituality, India can offer that. And if India has to offer that spirituality to the world, she has to be politically free too. And this is bound to happen. It might take 10 years more, 20 years more, but I can clearly see that India will be politically free soon. So this he saw in the year 1909 itself, about 40 years before, nearly 40 years before India actually became independent. He was very clear. So after he comes out, I mean, at the end of 1 year, he is released as innocent. And you should also read that the legal fight that takes place in the court. And an advocate, Mr. Chittaranjan, he speaks such lofty words about Sri Aurobindo. Just when you read it, you get goosebumps. He says, here is a man whom the world will adore in the next 100 years. What he has done, what he will be doing is something that we can't even imagine. So this man could see what Sri Aurobindo was up to, and that's what he presents as a case. And Sri Aurobindo is released as innocent. Even after he comes out, the British were sleepless. They had some kind of fear. I mean, this man never took a sword, never took a weapon in his hand. All his weapon was his pen, right? Like the proverbial statement, the pen is mightier than the sword. That they could actually say it in Sri Aurobindo. Right? So when he's released, there were various kinds of receptions that were organized for him, and in a place called Uttarapara, he is invited to give a talk. And that is a very famous speech called Uttarapara speech. And if you really have to understand Sri Aurobindo, the work, the promise that he holds for India, you should really read this particular speech called as Uttarapara speech. And to understand it about his life in the prison, you should read a very short book called Tales of Prison Life. Okay, it's a beautiful book written in a nice language and also in a very humorous tone. So these two are something you can consider. This Uttarapara speech is just about 5-6 pages article, and it's a very powerful. Every Indian should read. Everyone aspiring for yoga and aspiring for evolution should read. Okay, that's the kind of document this is. After this, again for 1 year or so, he's little actively involved in political life, but over time he realizes his work should not be limited to the political spectrum. In fact, he keeps on receiving invitations to head the Indian National Congress and many other forums. But at 1910, it becomes very clear to him that the work has to happen at a spiritual plane. So this is the third and the most important phase of his life, that is the spiritual phase, starting from the year 1910 up to the year 1950 when he leaves his mortal remains. Right? So that was 40 years of intense spiritual sadhana that he undertakes. While he's undertaking the spiritual sadhana for nearly 4 years initially, 1910 to 1914, he's more in a silent zone. And from 1914 onwards, he starts communicating. It is at this period he starts composing magnum opuses, voluminous books. I mean, we are told at some point of time he was writing 6 books, and each book was not a small book. Let me just show you. This is one of the books called Synthesis of Yoga, right? This is such voluminous book. So like this, he was writing parallelly, as though like he used to write one chapter in this book or few pages of one book and then take up another book and just write it down. And we find it difficult to compose Facebook notes or Instagram messages like that parallelly, but he was able to write 6 books of such intensity parallelly. That was his intellectual capacity. So 1914 onwards, this starts and it continues up to 1950 till the last day of his life. And one book that he kept on writing and writing and revising is Savitri. Savitri is a small episode from Mahabharata. Okay, the story is a very brief story. Here is a lady who got married to someone, and also knowing that he has a short life, yet because of his virtues, she chose him. And after the 1 year, when he's about to die, or when Yama takes his life, Savitri follows Yama, and in an intense debate that follows, she defeats him, and Yama is forced to give few boons, 3 boons to her. And out of which she also gets the life back of her husband. This is just the short story. So Sri Aurobindo picks up this story and makes it a legend. Like you have these Mahakavyas, right? Ramayana, Mahabharata, or in the Western tradition, Odyssey and all these things. So Sri Aurobindo elevates this short story into that kind of a Mahakavya. And he pours in every bit of his spiritual insight into this particular text. So this was Sri Aurobindo's life in brief. He was a political master strategist, political writer, orator. He was a poetic genius. He was a spiritual master. All this combined into one. And the man who could inspire millions and millions. And while doing all these things, he comes up with a very systematically laid out philosophy, what we call it as integral yoga. He looks into the tradition of yoga. He sees how it took shape, to what end it is going, where were some of the loopholes or lacuna that he perceived, and how can it be renewed and given a a more powerful orientation. So in this backdrop, he comes up with integral yoga. And this integral yoga comes through of his various writings. But one book that really gives us great insight into Sri Aurobindo's understanding of yoga. And in fact, the way he puts it, I think this is the beauty of the Indic thought, and which Sri Aurobindo also represents and gives it a more beautiful shape, is the idea of synthesis. How do you synthesize things? While things are different, things appear to be different, on what basis can they be reconciled? On what basis can they be synthesized? So keeping that in mind, he presents this magnum opus, again, yet another magnum opus called Synthesis of Yoga. And in the Synthesis of Yoga, the very first set of chapters explore what is the relationship between life and yoga. And at the end of the first chapter, the concluding statement is all life is yoga. So let's see what it is, right? I mean, the way he's able to look into the past and the future, and which he presents in such a powerful language, is uncomparable. He says that, which also, like, if all of us look into, start exploring, we can easily connect to this idea that in nature generally, because life is nothing but a, a small capsule of nature. There is a point where we are born. There is a point where we seem to discontinue this journey, the formally expressed journey, right? That is what we call as life. But whether we are there, whether someone else is there, life continues. But then what is it? It's the work of nature that continues. So life and nature in that way are synonymous. And what do we see in nature? He says, at any given point of time, nature has these two forces in play. One force that tries to get into better and better form. There is organization taking place. There is, I mean, it's not just confined to the human element, just like with all her various elements of creation. So there's, on one side, there seems to be a constructive process that is happening. And at the same time, there's also a destructive process that is happening. It might appear to be abstract. Let me give you a few examples. See, all of us have seen within our own lives where life is trying to formally take a shape. We feel, things are coming under control. Things are beautifully falling in place. There seems to be a graceful pattern that is emerging. So there is some constructive direction towards for this whole movement. But there are occasions where we feel life is falling apart. Things are tearing down. They're just going out of control. So it's completely another force at play. He says this happens at the individual level. This happens at the collective level. This happens at the universal level too. At all levels, this keeps on happening. It happens at the state level. It happens at the national level. It happens at the world level. Maybe at some times we are not able to see them as two distinct forces. They are chaotic when we can't recognize both these forces at play. I mean, just look at the life of any nation. There's a period that they grow, they go to a peak of their contribution. But while you expect and while you desire that they continue in that contributive state, already there is a decay that sets in. And then it starts disintegrating. Right? What is actually happening here? Why is that when you think a better form has emerged, then it starts disintegrating? Why? I mean, someone was asking me a few years ago when Trump was about to get elected, what do you think about Trump? I mean, they wanted me to say, oh, Trump is bad, Trump is going to harm the world, all these things. But I just said, see, my worry is not about Trump getting elected, but I'm sad and I'm pained that today America has come to a state where you have to choose between one Clinton and one Trump. I mean, you had leaders like Abraham Lincoln. You had leaders, those who wrote the Charter of Independence. I mean, charter is such a beautiful charter that you have in pursuit of happiness. I don't know if other parts of the world thought about it, but the founders of America wrote that that has to be the primary right, right? When you had such people, such leaders, and today you have come to a state where you have to choose either between Trump or a Clinton. This is a sad state of affairs, right? America, which seemed to be peaked, which seemed to be powerful, today is in such a state. Any nation for that matter, right? Europe at some point considered to be the cradle of civilization and culture. It went to a peak. It colonized the entire world. The entire wealth was in the hands of Europe. Today, what do you see? A helpless Europe? I mean, just see when one of its own neighborhoods, Ukraine, is being attacked. They're just sitting afar and saying, oh, people put sanctions on Russia, do this, do that. I mean, what is their prowess? What are they going to do? Very little, because they don't have the power today. They are a spent force. So Europe went to its peak, it has come down. America took over the momentum, it went to a peak in the beginning of the 19th century, in the beginning of the 20th century. Like America, people felt that this is one country that can do anything in the world, right? And which they did also at times. They took that liberty. And today they also seem to be helpless. Like any country for China at the moment appears, oh, it can do anything. Of course, we have seen in last couple of years what China has done to the world. So, but they seem to be powerful. But even this graph is going to change. It's just a matter of time. So, what I'm trying to say is that every such country, culture, individual, or a society at some point of time seem to be poised for a greatness. So there is a constructive movement, a development that is happening. But even before or just about it reaches a peak, there's already a disintegration that has started. So in every fall lies the seed of the next germination or next growth. And in every growth lies the seed of the fall. What is this happening then? Why is this happening then? If you look at just small phases of time, you get caught with what is happening and with the intensity of it. But if you take larger spans of time, then you really understand this is a continuous process that has always been happening, right? Then what is it? If it is happening and you can recognize this pattern, it really makes sense to understand it. Sri Aurobindo says, this is the movement of nature to find more and more better forms for her expression and what she calls it as evolution. So nature is experimenting with her own creation. How can she attain a better state? And once she attains a certain state, see, any stable system is very closed for experimentation. It can't take experimentation. It is satisfied with the way it is, right? If something new has to emerge, this form has to give way. If this form continues to hold, then a better form can never emerge, right? And therefore, this form, before the emergence of the next form, this form has to disintegrate. And for that, when that disintegration is happening, is what when we get worried and we get nostalgic. Oh, it was so good then. It was happening. Everything was perfect, but things are now falling apart, right? But if I hold on to that form, then a better form will never ever emerge at all. If a pupa is so comfortable in its covering and it wants to remain, then at no point would a beautiful butterfly emerge out of that, right? That the form of the pupa has to give way, and then only a new form can emerge. When a seed is sowed in the earth, just see where it is being put. It's being put into the bottom, it's being covered, It's being put in a place where there is no light. So if you just look at that phase, you get to worry that, oh, what is happening with my life? I'm going down and down. I'm going to a place where there's no light also. I also start to disintegrate if I just see at that point. But if it takes a larger picture, it's when the seed breaks, right? In that condition where there is warmth, where is darkness, and there's no light. It's then the seed, the sprout comes out. The germination happens at that point of time. So that is a better form than the seed. Therefore, seed has to give way. With seed, nature had attained some stability, but that is not enough. The next level has to come out, right? In this manner, there is a constant urge in Mother Nature to create or to always create a better and a better form so that she manifests herself fully and also unites herself to her source. So here there are technical terms that are used to describe this. Evolution is what the way the world has come out of that original source, and involution is this manifested world going back to the source. So here he says what this trajectory of nature that we see, where she's gearing up herself to express herself better, this a methodized effort towards self-perfection. I think this is what is so important. There's always this urge for self-perfection, right? And in this urge for self-perfection, she is creating and co-creating. And this is what he calls is nothing but yoga, right? Now, what do we understand by yoga? Of course, doing asana is yoga, doing pranayama is yoga, doing some sort of meditation is yoga. But what actually are we trying to achieve through all these, right? What is that we are trying to achieve? We are trying to become a better version of ourselves. What does that mean when we want to be a better version of ourselves? It's to grow and outgrow certain things, right? I'm growing in maturity, and there are things that I need to outgrow, my limitations, my meanness, my limited sense of thinking, being, feeling, and acting, right? All these are various kinds of factors that hold me, bog me down. I need to outgrow them. So yoga, seen in that way, is nothing but a constant endeavor to better oneself, to be the best version of ourselves, right? So this is what we consider as yoga. And all these are the tools of yoga. Asana is a tool of yoga. Pranayama is a tool of yoga. Mantra is a tool of yoga. Everything that helps to elevate us, everything that helps to liberate us from our bindings, everything that helps to expand our sense of being, right? That is yoga. See what is happening in nature as well. Through every form that she creates, she's pushing the manifestation expression of one more latent capacity that was there, right? I mean, just see the human body evolution or any life that has been evolved. People say that for the eyes to evolve in this manner, the way it is today, nature tried out not less than 14 different variations. So there were different variations of the eye that came in, and now after having achieved this, then more or less it got stabilized as a prototype, which was experimented, and now this is used everywhere, right? I mean, just in this manner, she keeps on experimenting with things. And when with this eye, with this instrument, you can see things, you can capture things, not just the form, not just the shape, but the color. I mean, so many things, the depth, like see the kind of various finer elements that the eyes can capture. It's not easy, it's not simple. We have come with it and we take it for granted. But if you look at from the retrospective view, you can see how much nature has toiled to arrive at this state, right? So she has been continuously working on herself with her own forms to create a new creation. So this is the human form today. We don't know what is going to come. She has found some stability. We are here today. But over a period of time, if there's a better function that needs to be achieved, she will not have any hesitation to change a form, right? I mean, because she is laid with infinite resources and infinite time at her dispensation. I mean, just look at the number of years that she has taken to arrive at this state. Years and years, thousands and thousands of years. All that she has is time and space, and she can experiment. But that's where the human element becomes so important, right? In the human being, she for the first time finds her conscious collaborator. She could have continued without the help of human being. I mean, someone asked me, I mean, you tell human being is the conscious collaborator, but he's so much involved in destructing the nature and the universe. How can he be conscious collaborator? But just look at this thing. The day she finds human being not capable of serving her purpose, that continued evolution, it will not take her much time to remove him from the face of this earth. We know what one corona did. One small virus. It held everyone under threat for 2-3 years. We don't even know whether it has gone. It can come back. So just one tiny scratch for her, one shaking of her elbow or a shoulder somewhere can take away millions of lives, right? One earthquake, one thunderbolt, one something, one small event here or there can just change the course of the world. And why? She's not worried. She has, again, as I say, infinite time and space. She can go on rebuilding it. She is not worried, oh, I have evolved this human being after so many years. What if he doesn't support me? All my energy has wasted. No, she does not think in these lines because she is blessed with infinity. She just says, okay, let me create again. And she can go on doing it. But what is expected is a conscious collaborator. And this is where, again, the idea of yoga comes into picture. Sri Aurobindo and Swami Vivekananda say that yoga is that means by which you compress evolution of a lifetime or a few lifetime into just one life, or for that matter, few years or few months. Yoga is that conscious process. So this is where it differs slightly between what happens in human beings and what happens in nature. In nature, it is an unconscious process. She is constantly endeavoring herself to create better and better forms so that there is a self-perfection that she is tending towards. In that large scale scheme of things, human being has rightly evolved at that stage where he can be her collaborator. And this is what nature expects from human beings, right? And this is where yoga, the idea of yoga, which is conscious in human beings and unconscious in the nature, now has come to a state where over a period of time, in nature, it becomes conscious, and in human beings, it becomes so natural that it just becomes an unconscious programming within them. What do I mean by that? Sri Aurobindo elsewhere says, the choice that human beings have is not between doing yoga and not doing yoga. No, this is not the choice that you have. The choice that you have is whether you do it voluntarily or whether will you forced to do that. Either you can take it up voluntarily, but if you're not aware, if you don't intend to become aware, then one day or the other you will be pushed in such a way that you will be forced to take it up. Just see, look into the lives of many who have come into yoga, right? How does it start for many of us? We start because we had a pain in the body. There was a back pain, there was a neck pain, there was something, there was BP, there was sugar, some or the other problem, right? And with that problem, actually the process of yoga begins. Not many people, when they come to yoga, they come with that lofty idea of life transformation. No, for most of us, we start with a pain point. There's something that is hurting us. We were completely unaware, ignorant, we were in another world, but we are pushed to open our eyes to yoga because something is bothering us, right? Because of that, we started to reap certain benefits. And when we started to reap those benefits, we felt we just can't limit our understanding of yoga to this particular thing. It has to expand. And once we start benefiting the experiences of yoga, then we feel compelled to share with our people around, right? This is how most people have come into yoga. So what is it? It's not the choice between doing and not doing, but the choice between whether I take it up voluntarily or whether I'm forced to take it up, right? So in this manner, Sri Aurobindo says, nature is already in the process of yoga. Whether you're there or not there, it doesn't matter. She has taken this up. And whatever she takes up, she takes it to a logical conclusion. So she is bound to reach this creation with its source, but with all its perfection, with the glory of its perfection. In that, we are right at that midpoint stage where we can actually help her to accelerate this process, or for a short period, we might even be her hindrance. And if we become her hindrance, she has a lot of tools at her disposal, either to bring us back to her process or create a form which will definitely help her, right? But in either way, whether as human beings, the way we are, or any other better form of beings that we may become, either way, what we are actually doing is taking up the work of yoga, the taking up the work of nature, which she has started long back. And just continuing it, because of our ability, we can accelerate this process. It can be fastened up. It can be it can go on a quite faster pace, but the work will and cannot be stopped. This will continue, this has to continue. Therefore, Sri Aurobindo says, all life is yoga. Whether we know it or we don't know it, whether we understand it, whether we don't understand it, but all life is yoga. The sooner we understand, the better it would be. Otherwise, we'll be just spending a lot of time going round and round in circles till we realize this. And therefore, he says, we need to realize this and be that conscious collaborator which or who can help nature to take this at a faster pace. And in that sense, in that context, your life gets aligned to a larger purpose. Of course, there are purpose for each and every being, every life, but there's also a larger purpose of nature which is playing out. One can always align to that. And when this alignment happens, that's also sort of a yoga, right? So in this manner, seen in this manner, all life is nothing but yoga alone. It's just that we need to have our moment of realization that there's a larger work at play and I need to align with it and be that efficient tool of Mother Nature to carry her work and to reach the phase of self-perfection, seeking evolution at every point, every day, with every incident, every moment, so that this whole process is speeded up. So with this, I'll just bring this short discussion to a conclusion. I know I couldn't do full justice for this topic, but given the time I'll just put this out, and whatever questions come up, I'm happy to take up here at this point. So in this manner, he continues that after understanding that all life is yoga, then he tries to explain what has that nature has already achieved in human beings. He says there are three things that nature has done. One is there is one element which she has completely mastered and evolved it to a good perfection. There is a second that she is working, and the third one yet to happen. So that's where the human body, human mind, and a greater promise comes into picture. So in order to work with these three or work at these levels, there are different forms of yoga. And all these forms of yoga, the traditional ones, the modern ones, whatever we understand, or the majorly the four ones, the Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, and Jnana Yoga, all these things can be reconciled when we really understand that yoga is nothing but the work of the nature. So it is in that backdrop that reconciliation and synthesis is possible. So this is how the whole text of synthesis of yoga with his philosophy of integral yoga spans out. So with this, I'll bring this discussion to a conclusion and open it up for any questions and comments. Thank you.
Namaste, Dr. Banavathy. That was such a beautiful, profound talk. Thank you so much. We do have a few questions, but if I may, I have a question that I'd like to start with. So when you say we have to become conscious collaborators of nature or with nature, in what context? I mean, how do we do that as yoga practitioners or as meditators? In what context? Because if we are a product of nature, how can we possibly enhance something that has created us?
See, when of course we are all product of nature and we come with certain program to begin with, right? And when we come here, we come with our own baggages of many lives or the circumstances that we are born, the thought patterns that we carry from our surroundings. All these is what makes us, right? This being the case, can I be a prison of all these things for all the time to come is a question. Just because I had a difficult childhood, just because I had a difficult upbringing, can I continue to be the prison of that past? Or can I just remain as a prisoner of my environment? Right? Is a big question. So when I start questioning these, I will outgrow those limitations. When I outgrow those limitations, I act with a greater degree of freedom. What I do, what I think is not limited by what had happened in the past. What will the other person respond? Like, I mean, I'm just giving you some behavioral expressions of what is happening or what we refer to as evolution, right? There is a better version of ourselves coming. And the better version of ourselves means a more spontaneous connect with everything, with one's own surrounding and one's own people, with nature, with one. I mean, one is more conscious of things around, not sensitive, not just being sensitive, but more conscious. Knows what are the best tools available to him at that point of time, the best actions to to choose among the given set of possibilities. So all these are what we call or what we identify as signs of maturity and growth. So this is what we mean by conscious collaborator. I mean, it's just that if I'm able to outgrow certain tendencies in myself, I'm sure I impact my people around. I mean, just because of one Swami Vivekananda or one Sri Aurobindo, there are thousands and millions who have been inspired, right? We know that story of that monkey of that island, no? Where I don't know whether it's a fictional story or a real story, where one of the monkeys achieved a new skill, and by the virtue of one monkey attaining that skill, In fact, that whole community of monkeys were able to get that skill. So something is broken. And Sri Aurobindo here itself in Synthesis of Yoga, he says, when he is referring to the possible limitations or possible uh, conditions offered, challenges offered by the body or the material, he says, that is no reason to give up. He says, for in the divine providence of things, our biggest obstacles are our biggest opportunities. Right? So it's when these circumstances are there, when I outgrow it for myself, I am definitely helping it for others too as well. So this, like many other things, being conscious is also contagious. People get inspired, they get touched by it, and they start to imbibe that. So there's a greater conscious community that emerges. And we don't have, I mean, of course, it's desirable to have it swell up to masses, but even if we get that critical number, that is good enough, where the world continues or the nature continues her work with an accelerated pace.
Okay, thank you. We have one question from Kanchanji, who is saying, can you explain self-transformation according to Sri Aurobindo?
Well, I'll refrain myself taking that question fully because that itself is a long question. But to present it in a very brief manner, Sri Aurobindo says that there are different levels of human existence. And at the moment, we have attained a level where the logical mind is active, the thinking mind is active. This is one level of evolution. But going further, he uses the levels called overmind and supramind, which are higher states. And he says the things that we have taken for granted, eventually at some point of time, when this continuous evolution progresses, at some point of time, when that supermind has descended, it's a state where the things that we have taken for granted, including old age, death, decay, all these things, even they may not occur. So there is a state where every cell of your body realizes that it is Brahman. This is where he differs slightly from the traditional perspective. Just to give you an analogy here, he says that in the tradition, people always felt realizing Brahman was the highest goal. And once you realize, that is done. But Sri Aurobindo takes it forward, or I mean, he highlights the other aspect where he says it's not just about realizing Brahman, but allowing that realization of Brahman to express in day-to-day life, and not just in your living, but in your body, in your physical, at all the levels. Like that realization should express itself so that every cell of your body also realizes that it's nothing but Brahman, and manifest those qualities. And what are the general attributes that we speak about Brahman? Something that is infinite, something that is without death or decay, something that is of a great value, right? So those elements or those attributes also get expressed in every cell of human body or any life. So that, or in summary, the ultimate realization is not just to realize there, but that realization should come to life, and every cell of the human body, every animal, like everything that is there in the manifested world should be able to realize that it is Brahman. And that ways of being and behaving of Brahman should manifest in life too, in the express form of life too. This is the final transformation, according to Sri Aurobindo.
So is nature also a manifestation of that supreme Brahman? It is not separate from it. It is.
It's a manifestation of the same Brahman, but he says that it's almost like there is a game that is there playing out, where it has forgotten its Brahman nature. So there was light all around, and in order to experience what darkness is, the light got covered. So now the journey has started from darkness, moving back to the light. This is the game of life, what he calls as Leela. So it's the Brahman's Leela, which is expressing itself in the story of nature, the manifested, like he uses the word Maya to explain this. By Maya, he does not take it in the sense of illusion. Like the word Maya comes from the root to mean mang mane, to measure. He says, this is the measure of Brahman. What you call as universe is nothing but a manifested measure, manifested dimension of Brahman, right? Where it is playing this hide and seek game. The light seems to be lost, and now it is trying to recover that light through all these forms. It is trying to recover its original self perfection, and that is where she is evolving to. So she is on a very powerful movement, but the movement is so large. The movement is both in terms of time and space so huge that we find it difficult to recognize the movement, right? If you just take a long, or I mean, if you take a big circle, a circle, if it's so large, if you look at any parts of it, you don't find that it is actually is a circumference. You feel like it's a straight line, but it's actually a segment of a larger circle. So in this manner, even here, the movement of the progression of nature is happening, but since we look at in shorter spans of time, we are not able to recognize what is happening. Just look at the physical world or the material world. The kind of changes that happened in last 5 years is much more than the changes that have happened in last 50 years, is much more than the changes that have happened in the last 500 years. The kind of progress we are making. Of course, you might ask, what kind of progress is this? But still, there is a huge speed in which things are moving. I mean, look at how today, through the what they call IoT, intelligence of things, each physical element is connected. Your fridge is connected to the supermarket. Your house mat is connected to your fridge. Your clothes have been, they measure how healthy you are. I mean, everything is speaking to the other. What you would consider as a non-speaking entity today have started to speaking to each other. Of course, this is artificial intelligence, but just the kind of progress that has happened in the material world. This is huge. We just don't know where we will be in next 10 years. Right? So there's a huge movement that is happening. Of course, you might all say that, oh, man has created all these things. All this is happening because of man's intellect. Yes, no doubt. It's happening because of man's intellect. But there's something larger picture that is emerging, and there's a newer direction that we are moving towards. So yeah, that's where seem to be heading.
Okay, thank you. We have another question. Kanchanji again is asking, so it's going back to the source, right? I think this is a part 2 of the question that she asked earlier.
Well, it's slightly tricky in the sense that, in the sense that, so from light, we seem to have descended, and we are now going back towards that light. In that sense, yes, we are going back to the source. But if you look into our understanding of time, it's not a cyclic time that we are looking at. It's not that if we have started with point A, we do this whole cycle and coming back to say the point A. No, this is more like a spiral where you started from a point, you went up, then you descended, but when you descended, you're not in the same point where you started. It's to the already next level. And when you go up, it's actually furthermore. So we are progressing in different dimensions. So in that sense, it is not the same point that we are coming back. It's definitely similar, but a different point. So yeah, depending on what exactly was the question, you can see if it's about self-perfection, yes, there was a state of self-perfection and towards which we are moving. But here again, while we go back, it's not the same state. Let me give you a quick example in this context. An ignorant man is a happy man. There are no conflicts. It's very simple. It's only when one starts to become conscious, the conflicts increase. Just to give an example, if someone decides to go to yoga class, okay, till this point, you have not thought about yoga, you're happy, you know how you're going to spend, you roam around, you do this, you do that, whatever. But now at this point, you have decided to go to a yoga class. So every day, 5 to 6 is reserved for yoga. Then your problems start initially. Oh, something comes up, a meeting comes up, or friends invite you for a coffee or something. So then you have to make a choice. You have made a decision to go to yoga, but now your friends are inviting you. So you have to choose either of them. And therefore, there is a conflict. When you were an ignorant person, when you did not want to be conscious, then you had no problem there. It's only when you step now to be a more conscious person, to be a little more careful and respectful towards your body, towards your feeling, you want to give some more time for yourself. When you are looking at these lines, then you have problems. There is something or the other. It's not just the laziness, but there's something genuinely that comes up that bothers you. So conflicts come. And when conflicts are there, you're restless. Initially, you were happy as an ignorant person. But now, when you decided to be conscious, your conflicts have increased. Therefore, your unhappiness has increased. But this peaks at some point, and then it gradually settles down. It might take days, it might take years, it might take decades. But there is a movement here. But when you settle down at that point, you are again a happy person. But the happy person you are then and happy person you were earlier, they're qualitatively completely different happy persons. They do not match in quantity, or they do not match in quality. It's completely different. So yes, being a happy person, yes, you appear to be similar, but qualitatively you are completely different from that stage A to stage B. So yes and no to that question.
Okay, we seem to have, thank you, Kanchanji. I hope that answers your question. From Raghavanji, who's saying, so yoga is a step to connect with nature and continue the journey of self-realization.
True. Again, when nature, it's not just the surroundings around, it's not just the greenery, it's not in that sense, but a conscious force that holds everything in her bosom. That's what we are referring to as nature. Whether human being, whether animals, whether plants, everything seems to be goaded by a larger force. So that's what we refer to here as nature. So being aligned to that, being connected with that, and being aligned or connected with that naturally implies being connected with the external nature also. Or it's other way also too. If one is able to spontaneously connect with people around, with things around, with beings around, including the animals or the plants, this that is an expression of an alignment that is taking place. So that means you're closer to Mother Nature. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Raghavanji. I hope that answers your question. Anjanji is asking, if we are part of nature, then how can we take tips from our surroundings for silence of the mind, which is an important requirement?
Well, I think that's where the whole idea comes. See, nature is not under the pressure to develop systems of yoga because it's experimenting. And through experimentation, like in larger canvas of space and time, it is trying out. So what helps over a period of time, it keeps. What doesn't help, it removes. But for human beings, because we have a limited span of time, we need to come up with set of systematic practices, what we call as yoga. So here, what helps us? What particular tools help us to keep the mind calm, or whatever end result that we intend to achieve is what we need to select. Traditionally, we have been bequeathed with a lot of tools, right? Meditation, or if you just take the set of tools provided in Yoga Sutra, that is Ekatattva Abhyasa, there are 6 to 7 sets of practices: walking, connecting with nature, connecting with music. All these things are different simple tools that are set there, but it could be anything else also. So that is what one needs to seek for oneself as to what is the most helpful for that individual and at that point of time in his phase of life. See, all of us are going through our own phases of lives. We are running a relay race here. We are not in a sprint. And people who come and see us at some point of time, they don't know what is the lap we are running, whether we are in the first lap, second lap, third lap, or the fourth lap. Everyone seems to be running, right? So we don't know in which lap we are in. So in this lap, in this phase, something is helpful. Maybe when I move on to the next lap, this particular tool may not be that efficient for me. I might need something else. So what actually helps me is what I need to explore. But the beauty of the yoga field is it's quiet, it has a quite open architecture, and you are being given with a toolbox, not one particular tool. So we need to choose what works best for us.
Thank you. In our chat section, Devi Prasad Sharma ji has asked, I don't know if this is an observation or 2 questions, but in the first part, he has asked, the ultimate purpose of yoga is to help the Jivatma moving, evolving, and becoming like Paramatma, or to achieve the target of self-realization. And then he's written again, does yoga help to come? I think yoga shall help to come out of the dualities of the game of the mind, but helps in achieving sthita prajnata. So it's in 2 different
Let me
dialogues.
just, I think the first one is also an observation. Like, let me pick it up from here. Sri Aurobindo also very clearly says that this whole journey is not just about individual realization. The individual, universal, and the transcendental. So yoga is bringing all these 3 together. So universal is nature. Transcendental is something that goes beyond universal and the individual. That is the transcendental, what we call traditionally as Brahman. So aligning all these 3, the individual, universal, and the transcendental, is the goal of yoga.
Thank you so much. I think that's all the questions we have for today, and we've managed to answer all. So that was wonderful. And also, just to remind everyone, anytime you'd like to revisit this conversation or any of the wonderful talks that we've compiled for the International Day of Yoga celebrations, all of the talks are recorded and can be found on our Facebook channel as well as our website and our YouTube channels. Before we end this session, we'd just like to make a few announcements. So the first being tomorrow, of course, we will continue as usual with our weekly Yoga Insight sessions. Tomorrow, if we can have the poster up, please. Yes. Tomorrow, we'll have a talk by Dr. Sirisha Putluri, who will talk about plant-based diet and lifestyle for wellness. She is a dietary and lifestyle medicine coach and diabetes educator. And also we have some very exciting Indica Yoga courses coming up. And we've launched our first foundation yoga course. Okay, before we get to that, the following week after Sirisha ji's session on Yoga Insights, we will be having Akanksha Damini Joshi, who's a very well-known filmmaker, author, and poet, joining us to show us gratitude meditation. This is going to be a practical session that's based on the Pancha Mahayagna. So please join us for that, which will also be July 1st, Friday, 6:30 to 8. And then, of course, like I said, we're having our first residential yoga foundation course at the Ritambara retreat in Bangalore. All the details for this course are on our website, where you can also register for it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Koti ji, for the poster. Thank you so much. So as I said, all of our talks, whether it's Yoga Insights or our Yoga Day celebrations, can be found on our website, YouTube channel, and our Indica Yoga web and our social media. So any message you'd like to leave us with before we end the session, Dr. Banavathy?
No, just two things quickly. One is, see, we looked into the lives of Swami Vivekananda, Ramana Maharshi, and Sri Aurobindo. And as it appears as a coincidence, on Indica Courses platform, we have courses on all these three people coming up. So course on Swami Vivekananda, Life and Birth of Swami Vivekananda starting in September. Similarly, one course on Ramana Maharshi has also been announced, and a course on Sri Aurobindo will also be announced shortly. And this was not planned. So we took up these three, and almost at the same time, even these courses have come up. So please make use of these opportunities, and looking into these lives will inspire us like anything. I mean, someone said that if Swami Vivekananda does not inspire you, no one can inspire you. Like that is the kind of work that Swami Vivekananda has done. And if you look into Sri Aurobindo, it's nothing but, there's a book titled by this name, but there's nothing but an adventure of consciousness. He embodies that. He manifests what like you were asking, what is it to be conscious collaborator? You can see it in the life of Sri Aurobindo as to what a conscious collaborator can do. So that is the life of these masters. So please connect with these ideas, please connect with these ideals, and in this backdrop, try to understand yoga. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for your wonderful comments. Patricia Morrison-G, thank you. She says it was a very interesting talk. Thank you for your encouragement and support to all our participants for our talks here and for Yoga Insights. Raj Kumari ji has also said this was very enlightening. Sheila ji has said excellent. Thank you so much for all your comments. But I think we're going to have to take our leave now. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And Dr. Banavathy, thank you for your time. Have a beautiful weekend, everybody. And I'll see you all tomorrow for Yoga Insights. Do join us. Registration is on our website. Namaste. Dhanyavad.